But hello. I want to welcome everybody in today. Thank you so much for coming. This is a super exciting mashup of some Metagov work as well as some work in decentralized science with DeSci Foundation. So excited to do the introduction for both of these things. This is the second in a series focused specifically on AI and research and how we're making AI and research a little bit more aligned with what the researchers need. And so I'm super excited to be doing this mashup. For context, if you're here and you haven't been here as part of Metagov, Metagov is the skunkworks of the internet, as of governance, digital governance in the internet, as we like to say. It's a researchers collective that's mainly focused on how are we governing the internet and how are we governing ourselves. The DeSci Foundation is really focused on how are we leveling up technology that can support research. So it's specifically focused on how the research system is largely made for a long, long time ago. And they're trying to figure out how we can develop more technology that helps us work in the fact that we're working in the internet with a lot of data hanging about. In this context, we have invited Matt, who is a beautiful mashup as well of applied research in biomechanics at University of Washington, and also super focused on how are we building tools that can help us collaborate better. And generally, I found Matt's approach to collaboration super wonderful to work with because it's at the different levels. It has that level of tool building, but it's also very interpersonal and focuses on how are we building our human systems, our social systems. So I am very, very excited to hear from Matthew today. Before I pass it over to him, I will invite in the people who are coming in. As you're coming in, please just drop in chat your introductions and any of your and anything you want to let us know as we go into this conversation. But now I will pass it over to Matt.
Thank you, Ellie. Let me share my screen. How does that look?
Looks good.
Video panel. Show video panel, but hide floating meeting controls. There we go. And thanks to all of you for coming to hear me talk. So as Ellie mentioned, my name is Matt Akamatsu. I'm an assistant professor of biology at the University of Washington. And today I'll describe how my lab uses discourse graphs in order to conduct modular interoperable research, which has allowed us to do interdisciplinary research better. And I think will also help us collaborate better with LLMs as they become a more integral part of the research process. The first half of the talk is a retrospective about the software tool that we've built and the impact on our lab. And then the second half is more forward-looking. What type of publishing and collaboration system do we intend to build in the coming year, and how you might be able to get involved. So about the Discourse Graphs team, I founded the cell biology lab about 3 years ago, and soon thereafter, I also co-founded the Discourse Graphs project with Joelle Chan, who's a human-computer interaction researcher at the University of Maryland. And so now the Discourse Graphs team is a team of 8 people, including 4 engineers, a user experience designer, and a pilots manager. And we're a fiscally sponsored project currently supported by the Navigation Fund and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And broadly speaking, our project aims to build open source tools, particularly plugins, in order to support open science and collaboration within and between labs through modular interoperable research. Why did we found the Discourse Graphs project? We thought that this modular approach to research might help to address some of the systemic challenges to carrying out science. I think many of you are familiar with and is motivating your own work. For the purpose of this talk, I'll focus on the AI aspects that are rapidly emerging, that are, I would say, stress testing the current system for publication and grounding our claims in reality, and how uh, how that's going. So, for example, papers, which we've been using for 400 years or so as the main means of conducting science, sharing it, citing it between researchers, have become an increasingly lossy scientific communication medium as LLMs, large language models, have become more powerful. My favorite recent example that illustrates this mismatch between long form written narratives for science and how we're doing science on the ground is this emerging scandal in a conference called the International Conference on Learning Representations that some of my colleagues alerted me to recently, where a large number of the submissions and reviews for this conference on AI were themselves AI generated or AI reviewed. So, for example, the this post says that there was one entirely AI generated paper that made it into the top tier of submissions, but had a lot of sort of spurious information in it. Why did it get into the top tier? Because two of the reviews were also AI generated, and the one that wasn't AI generated said, "Wait, there's a lot of non-existent stuff in here. This isn't there's no substance here." And this isn't an isolated case. We're entering an era in which distinguishing real science from statistical gibberish will be essential. And maybe the long form narrative isn't well prepared to take on that task alone. More generally, for this same conference, another post described how a tool called Pangram assessed the extent to which all of the reviews and submissions for this conference were AI generated, and they found that at least half of the submissions were rated to be fully human written, but over 20% of them were also rated to be fully AI generated. And given the association with sort of the loss of substance from this first post, that is some type of alarm bell. But on a meta level, it also brings up this interesting question of, well, how well do we trust this metric from Pangram Labs? So the caveat, LLM generated text detection is not perfect, so there will be mistakes. So you would really love to see, what is the basis by which this metric was also generated, and how strongly should we hang our hats on this claim about AI generated? So there's this sort of nested question of like, where do you get to the the hard substance underneath all of these claims about whether it's about the state of AI research itself or how the extent to which they're AI generated. In both cases, you need some way of targeting the underlying hard evidence. And I'm also going to mention that on a social and socio-technical level, we're increasingly thinking about the role that humans can play as AI scientists become more and more capable. There's been a recent push towards fully autonomous AI scientists who can collect evidence, who can summarize, who can do computational research. Maybe they'll start working at the bench too, in a closed loop, which sounds very impressive, but for scientists has the effect of being quite disempowering and robbing us of the most fun parts of science. A great way to illustrate this challenge is from this diagram that Ronan Tamari at Cosmic Network recently posted, which describes this humans being in the loop with uh, with AI. And as AI becomes more and more powerful, if it's fully autonomous, it will pull humans further and further out of the loop until it's doing its own science and we're left not participating at all. But is there another path through technology, social systems, et cetera, where humans can continue to be conducting research together and that AI is more of a facilitator, contributor to the larger project of how we understand the natural world together, which will emerge from which will emerge important technologies and medicine, etc. But which I fundamentally think of as the process of being able to systematically understand the world through evidence-based reasoning. And uh, talking to scientists in my lab and other scientists, we agree that the fun part of doing science is the synthesis of available information and choosing what to work on. Those are like quite personal choices that different people will have different choices for, and we really lose something if the AI is substituting for it entirely. And so for these systemic challenges and others, we've chosen to try a different way to do science. And the goal is to break research into modular components that themselves can be reused, cited, and synthesized into longer form stories and narratives. And we do this by decomposing scientific arguments into its atomic elements, which are questions, claims, and evidence. Where did this model come from? There's a science philosopher named Stephen Toulmin who developed this system of questions, claims, and evidence as a way for scientific argument. And the main basis for this approach is that he's thinking of science not as a series of uh, facts that are true now and forever, but instead are a series of claims backed by stronger or weaker evidence. And so the textbooks have the best claims, but over time the textbooks change as more evidence arises for one or the other. And this project came about 5 years ago when I started collaborating with Joel during the pandemic and was interested in different ways for lab researchers to organize in a more grassroots manner, and what the sort of minimal unit for sharing would be way before we publish a paper that would allow for interdisciplinary work. For example, there were several of us trainees who wanted to contribute to an interdisciplinary COVID project. So how does COVID affect my favorite cell biology process? And so we needed a new way to collaborate. And the tools that Joelle was building really appealed to me as something we could adapt to this purpose of larger scale, citable collaborations that perhaps I could run my lab on. And to this end, we have developed discourse graphs as a protocol and a series of apps for the purpose of interoperable knowledge generation. So what is this information model that we're introducing with discourse graphs? It looks like this. So we've broken ongoing research and understanding of the published research into these three key elements: questions, claims, and evidence, and which is grounded in some source material. So the question is the unanswered thing that you're trying to answer. The claim is one current answer to the question, and it can be supported by one or more lines of evidence. And as I'll lay out in a couple of panels, the evidence can either come from a published research article, or it can come from your ongoing experiment or simulation, where fundamentally you're contributing one or more pieces of evidence. Evidence is generally a discrete observation or a measurement that happened at that one specific time from your single study, analysis, etc. And then the evidence can support or oppose a given claim, which you could also call a hypothesis. Those are interchangeable terms to us. And we tie these together into a graph. So the evidence can support or oppose the claim, and the claim can inform the question, and you start building up your evidence-based graph of your research project. And I'll return to the rest of this diagram shortly. So what is a concrete example of this evidence-based approach to understanding science? So let's say we have a research question of what is the fastest land animal? And I'm going to claim that cheetahs are the fastest land animal. And if you like, what is the evidentiary basis for me to claim that cheetahs are the fastest land animal? I can ask ChatGPT, and it gives me some numbers that turn out to be really a little bit kind of spurious. And they like cite National Geographic, which cites a like security footage video of a cheetah running that turns out to not add up in terms of how large the cage was and how fast they said it was going, etc. So you have to have some sort of hard evidence in order to support this claim. Luckily, a researcher did collect some hard evidence about the speed of a cheetah and published it in this sort of single metric by doing the following to create this measurement. They took a Jeep and put a piece of raw meat on the back of the Jeep, set up a track of a defined length, and had a stopwatch, and had a cheetah chase them on the back of the Jeep a few times, and timed how fast this cheetah actually ran. So this is some hard measurement that we can use to base our claim about how fast cheetahs run and use it to compare to measurements of other animals. And what I really like about this study is that it also includes all of the context that you would need to be able to interpret this number. The methods say, that day the wind was blowing slightly, and the author was well versed in the use of stopwatches because he was an athletics coach, so that you can make your own judgment about what this number really means as you start to make your own calibrate your own judgment about how strong this claim is. But the other thing I like about this approach is that if you start to make an evidence-based claim like this, that really invites other people who are doing research not to say, oh, I think you're wrong, or I don't like that claim, but instead to come with their own strong evidence if they want to make a counterclaim that gazelles are the fastest land animal, for example. And so this simple model gets us a long way towards having a structured basis for scientific argumentation. And you don't need much more than the discrete piece of evidence with context. So let's go back to this diagram. That explains the left side of this diagram where you have like an article with a single measurement, for example, that gives you this observation about the land speed of the cheetah from this one measurement to support whatever claim we have about the speed of cheetahs. And so when I entered the project with Joelle, we were using this tool for collaborative literature synthesis. What is the state of knowledge on a particular topic? And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if I could use the same model for my ongoing research? Because what else am I doing in the lab aside from trying to collect more pieces of evidence to support an ongoing claim or hypothesis? And because our lab is quite interdisciplinary, there's some people doing simulations and modeling, there's some people doing stem cell growth and microscopy. Wouldn't this be a great way for these people from different disciplines to talk to each other and to be able to build on each other's work in a more granular fashion? And so that's what the right side of this loop indicates. So for a given hypothesis, it's supported by one or more results from our lab notebooks, which are in the form of a specific experiment or intervention. And on the right, I indicate an extra element that we've added, which is a suggested or proposed experiment that we're calling an issue right now. So often when you're trying to create a really strong claim, you say, well, this would be really strong if we had this one other measurement. And so we sort of save those for later, document those, and those motivate new experiments that somebody else or they can carry out in the future. And this represents the sort of loop, a tighter loop of research to continually strengthen specific claims targeted towards a research question. Let's look at a second historical example that gives us some idea of this pathway between results and claims in active research. So 70 years ago, there were two competing claims for what the shape of DNA is. One claim was that DNA has a double helix structure with the negatively charged molecules on the outside. And then the other claim was that the DNA instead had a triple helix structure with all the negatively charged elements on the inside and the bases on the outside. And these remained two competing claims until a new result came onto the scene from Rosalind Franklin, where she took some DNA from calf thymus, shot an X-ray beam through it, and created this diffraction pattern, which showed this periodicity that gives us some information about basically what the spacing is between these bases over here. In historically, Watson and Crick stole that result and used it to inform their theory of the double helix of DNA. But in an alternate publishing system where Franklin could submit this individual result, then so long as the result is reproducible, that would be sufficient to say this is an important piece of evidence towards the general question about the shape and structure of DNA. We'll figure out exactly what the interpretation is. Maybe somebody else is going to help me work that out. And once she submits that result, then it can be used to strengthen either claim if it can. And so then Watson and Crick would need to cite her result in order to support their claim that DNA has a double helix structure. And this like needing to strengthen your claim is a really attractive way to attribute discrete pieces of evidence contributed by researchers across disciplines. And continuing this thought experiment, imagining that that Watson and Crick had first set up the claim and the experiment still needed to be done, they could have said in their theory, oh, well, if somebody does this one experiment, then we'll have stronger evidence about our theory. And so they would post an issue, and that would be something that another researcher could claim, turn into an experiment, and then that would generate their result. So in order to operationalize this model, we've developed a series of plugins with the following goals. One is to help researchers in our lab and in other labs to articulate our driving research questions and hypotheses, as well as orient specific experiments towards those questions. Second, to be able to inventory super early stage results and share those with the team. And third, to synthesize those early stage results and start to compile them into scientific stories. Those might be narratives, those might be presentations, etc. And to make sure that those stories are in context with what's currently known from prior research, both the unpublished research in our lab and published research out in the greater world. How do we help researchers achieve these three tasks? I'll give a sort of broad strokes overview of the type of components that we have created. This is really the type of human-computer interaction design and research that is the bread and butter of Joelle's research group. We make essentially a graph-based lab notebook and meetings document and board for you to start to compile your science stories with a low-cost way to tag the most salient observations, to iteratively formalize them, and to bring them back to you at different stages of your sense-making process. Let's say when you have to share the key result with your lab or with a collaborator. This helps to structure your own thinking so that you can pour back through your own lab notes and say, oh, right, that was the key observation. Maybe there's something to that. And then build your scientific story from the bottom up and be able to share individual elements. And I'll share some examples below of how we let researchers revisit specific observations from their previous work, synthesize it. And notably for the purposes of this talk, we've introduced some LLM tools to aid in different steps of this process, and they haven't really stuck for any number of reasons. The LLMs have not been a especially useful part of our flow to aid researchers in this structuring and thinking process. And so instead, we have these human-computer interaction components instead. I'm sure we'll find a way for the LLMs to contribute, but right now, over time, they've been less and less a part of the project, interestingly. Okay, so what has this allowed us to create, both within my lab and with other labs? So first, I'll give a high-level picture of what the discourse graph of my research lab looks like in two different views, and then I'll describe some specific use cases. So first, in terms of how do we get a bird's eye view of our discourse graph, for the purpose of this talk, I vibe coded an app which takes all of the pages and relationships in our graph and helps us visualize them. So here is a representation of the pages in our lab graph that are going to get populated over the course, the 3 years that my lab has been in existence, and the connections between them. So you have some like discrete pages, some questions, some like connections between them, etc., that are going to get populated. So let's play this and let's drag this forward. So what you're going to see over the course of these 3 years is the creation of new pages that are not typed. Those are the gray ones. Those are like project pages or meeting pages or whatever. But then they're also connected to uh, questions, claims, and evidence, where the green linkages are supporting relationships and the red linkages are opposing relationships. The darker black connections are one node that informs another. And it builds this really fascinating organic graph of knowledge, where from this representation, at least half of the nodes are interconnected with each other. And in practice, many of the rest of these are connected through other pages like a home page or a meetings page, etc. So what I really like about this visualization is that it helps us see what are some of the central nodes. So these are like central questions that we've done journal clubs about or that people are doing research on. There's some key uh, papers that we continue uh, to cite over and over again that are larger because there's more connections to them. There are claims, there's pieces of evidence, and then you can sort of see out at the edges. This is sort of the edge of how far we've gotten. So here's some claim supported by some evidence. Here's a result. If it's connected to a conclusion, that means we've probably sort of completed this line of work. If it's not, that means that we or somebody else should keep working on it. And there are also some mini graphs over here that represent some early stage work that people have done. You could imagine deciding you want to work further out into the unexplored space and sort of pick one of these mini graphs and start to work from there. So let's see here. Let's open like this result, for example. So this is a representation of the type of information that's in each page in our graph. So you have some like supporting and informing relationships. You have some content. You have some images. In this case, it's from our experiments that I'm representing through this app, just to give you a sense of the rich information that's in each page. And then I'll also show how this information, who created which of these nodes. I'm going to highlight the nodes based on who the creator of them was. So here's one from a PhD student. These are the ones created by me, ones created by a staff scientist, et cetera, et cetera. And I find this representation fascinating because in some ways it represents the style of research from each person in the lab and how sort of interconnected their work is, et cetera. But the main take-home message from this visualization for me is that not only are these questions, claims, and evidence interconnected with each other, but they're also connected between nodes that other people have created. And so this represents the sort of rich inter-collaboration between researchers in my lab. And you could imagine that each researcher's piece of evidence that they contribute now can be individually cited, and they have the sense that they're contributing to science almost immediately as soon as they join the lab. Okay, what's another way to look at this at our research overall? Here's the notebook itself, which is in Roam Research, the graph-based note-taking plugin. And I'm showing a abstract that I made a couple of weeks ago for a talk that summarizes several different projects in the lab. So this is sort of a standard abstract, but it also includes these hypertext links to the specific discourse nodes in within the lab graph that different people made. So for example, here is like our overall research question, which is also sort of like a workbook for new people in the lab. We have the a evidence from an existing paper from my postdoc that people can look through and sort of see what information has been collected from already. We have like a key observation. We have a different metric from this same data set that isn't published. We have an experiment, which looks like this. So here's like an experiment page with like goals, things that early observations, things that we still need to do, and an experimental log, which even includes like GIFs and diagrams, which really makes it self-evident to everybody in the lab what we've been working on. And okay, skipping ahead, we have another experiment and the another result over here. And so each of these is like a single observation, piece of evidence that's connected to the original experiment and informs our overall question. And what was very gratifying about this is that we have author information about every single bullet point and timestamp for each one as well, which lets us have very granular attribution information for every element of our graph, lets each person see how their research is contributing to the larger story of the lab, allowed them to give me some feedback about whether they agree with this claim or not, and so it helped me to adjust uh, my own description of their results, and also keeps me honest about who did the work when, so that credit can be properly distributed. Okay, so I'm going to describe a little bit more about how this has worked for us. So this has uh, allowed us to do a couple of things to articulate our driving research questions. For example, in this experiment page that I just described, where you can see the target question, you can see the result candidates that will eventually formalize into specific results. Tracking multiple of these experiments within a project that again has a target question and now has a series of results that we're going to compile into a manuscript or cite internally within the lab. And then with you can inventory super early stage results that I just described. You can synthesize preliminary results into scientific stories. So here is a whiteboard view of these discourse nodes that one of our users coined the murder board, where you're sort of tying together results into, okay, how strong is our evidence for like one claim or another, with a lot of unstructured information side by side, as well as these formal linkages to say, okay, this result definitely does oppose this hypothesis. Let me contribute that to the lab graph. And then finally, to be able to, oh, and let's look also at a more linear version of this, which is a figure where you start to turn your single results into a more linear story, where you sort of go from question, our like overall claim is up here, and that's supported by a few results. And this really demystifies the process of turning your science into a story, in this case, a figure for a collaborative paper or any other form of publication. And I'm going to skip over this last use case, which describes how issues allow individual researchers to have single entry points into research and make discrete results. And instead, move on to a description of our current user pilot. We're halfway through a 2-year user pilot with a number of research labs in the US and Canada, where they're adopting discourse graphs for their own experiment tracking, for research updates, for literature and project synthesis, or compiling their manuscripts. And we've built plugins for 2 different tools. One, Roam Research, which I just showed you, and second, Obsidian, uh, which is free and local first and based on Markdown files, which you can see here. So this is a folder of essentially Markdown files that are visualized in Obsidian, and we're adding in linkages and these semantic relationships between different claims and questions and evidence in a very sort of open and extensible way. And here's a similar uh, murder board with the person who coined this term, who's trying to make sense of the state of their project from their current results, what experiments are grounding the results, and then the ultimate claims that they would like to make stronger through more experiments. Okay, and we're working on a Notion integration as well. What impact has this had on researchers? They report that it helps them think like a scientist. So here's some quotes saying, I found huge improvements in my thinking and doing of science, or it's just helped the way of thinking. Even if I'm not using the extension, it keeps your brain in that structured mindset to stay focused. It's helped people feel like a scientist, meaning they're making an authentic research contribution. They're claiming more ownership over the terminology for doing evidence-based research. So here's an undergraduate who says they now have the confidence to speak up in lab meeting and say, here's what my interpretation of the stuff I'm working on is. What does everyone else think? So that we can separate the interpretation from the specific observation and share that earlier. And second, that being able to use the words hypothesis, supporting the hypothesis, starting out to feel like very foreign nomenclature, but now the words being part of this graph structure means that they feel like they can start to use them themselves for their early stage research. And then finally, to make an authentic research contribution. So here's a researcher in my lab saying that they were just looking for issues, potential experiments. And so looking through that, they found one that fit with their interests and just took the project from there, even without me having to set the project for them. They could sort of pick out their favorite potential experiment and run with it. And then finally, a user in our pilot saying, doing research through the discourse graph feels like true progress rather than just sort of having a shot in the dark on a blank page of paper, which is very gratifying to see how it's impacting early stage researchers to be able to conduct their research and make an authentic research contribution early towards collaborative projects. Okay, finally, I'm going to describe a little bit about where we think LLMs fit into this workflow in a systemic level. We think that by breaking research into modular elements, this puts much clearer boundaries on in which parts of the research process you'd like an LLM to participate. So, for example, collecting evidence from the published literature, there's some quite powerful LLM tools able to do that. That if you target it towards a research question, could help build up your evidence before you take its claim for granted. You could suggest an experiment or have one person suggest experiments based on how to make a claim stronger. You could conduct an individual analysis from one or more data sets to arrive at specific results, and then compile and recompile those results. And then finally, the results you could help to synthesize multiple results into an ongoing claim. And I think the important part about separating this is not only that individual researchers can continue to have single roles in this process, but a couple of these steps are quite subjective, like how you synthesize the available evidence, what experiment you decide to propose, what question you want to work on. Those are never going to be totally objective uh, choices. And so I think it's very important for a variety of researchers with their own sort of subjective understanding to have roles in each of these steps from synthesis to suggesting experiments. And by having this base of evidence that you and the LLMs can pull from, you can come to different working interpretations of the same shared set of evidence. How do we keep individual researchers empowered in this process? We think it's through research attribution of these individual modules. How would that look like? Well, if I've created one result, so long as I have the right metadata in this result when I'm sharing it, like who I am, when I created it, how you can cite it, and what the rules are for attributing this piece of research, then we might unlock the ability for a larger LLM to like pull from lots of different pieces of evidence and cite each of the pieces individually. And I, as a researcher, would still get credit for my contribution, and can have some control over how my work is used, as well as uh, motivates me to continue to make these discrete contributions. And here, this is showing the collaboration between two different labs, which we're building out the tools for. But you could also imagine doing the same thing between a lab and a large language model. How far have we gotten on this so far? So we've built an early stage database that lets two graphs talk to each other. For example, like one Roam graph from another that has some schema that reflects this discourse graph structure that lets you do more targeted search and will let us do cross graph citation. A couple of weeks ago, I attended a modular research standards workshop that the Continuous Science Foundation organized, that included a number of publishers and authoring tools, which resulted in, among other things, an initial standard called the Open Exchange Architecture that's focused on authoring systems, but that we think we can also bake in this sort of modular evidence citation into this standard. And we're continuing this work in a couple of uh, areas. One is another working group from the Continuous Foundation is going to be working on Zoom in the new year called the Reuse Working Group, that I'll be participating in. Hope that if you're interested in this, you can too. Second, co-organized by Ellie, we're running a second workshop on modular attribution in the middle of next year called Mira for this modular interoperable research attribution. That's going to be at an eco resort in Ireland outside Dublin called the Deerstone. And this workshop is supported by the Navigation Fund. It's going to have about 22 people or so, and there's open applications, which I think are live or will be live in a couple of days. So if you're interested in helping tool building, beta testing, designing this system, we encourage you to submit a short application in the next month, essentially. And because of time, I will skip ahead to say that we're very excited about this schema for doing science. It's really empowered and enabled the undergraduates and the PhD students and the postdocs in my own lab, and now in a handful of other research labs in cell biology and beyond. And we've started to think of discourse graphs as this protocol by which not only humans from different disciplines can communicate their research with each other, but now as AIs become more powerful, it's the means by which humans and AIs in a collaborative environment can make shared claims, differing claims off of a shared evidence base. There's also this page is also a live URL that you can visit if you want to be able to walk through this presentation, see the parts that I skipped over. I'll put the link in the chat as well. And true to form, our bibliography is itself a discourse graph with lots of hypotheses and connections to the results. Thanks for your attention. I'd be happy to talk more with questions.
Thank you so much. I think there was a question that came in chat from PatCon. If you want to jump in with the one around like less contained boundaries.
Less contained boundaries. Okay, look at all this
No,
chat that's been going on.
I can just summarize. Yeah, no, this is rad. I didn't think this would be as relevant. I thought this was like on the edge of things, but it's very much like right in my thoughts and thinking right now. Uh, yeah, I guess I'm just wondering like how if you have any thoughts on how a less contained group with like less clear boundaries, like a lab is like you know who's in, you know who's out, and like I'm curious whether you've seen examples of any of this style of work being used in more open spaces or porous boundaries, and what you think
Yeah,
would be gained or lost from that.
absolutely. We found that having a circle of trust is really important for people's willingness to share extremely early stage results that might change tomorrow. And so I think if you've built the social norms that people feel like they can trust the other people with this information, that's like, the seedling of their new research result, then that sort of social fabric will allow people to feel like they can share information specific at this early stage. Um, and so then you'd have these sort of nested circles of trust where you say, okay, we've established that we want to have a collaboration with this other group. It's been hard to communicate. Let me share this with you. We found that sort of nested circles of trust structure works much better than let me post this to the world and hope for the best. That you can certainly make each individual result, indexable or searchable, but most often people don't trust enough of the world to to share their early stage result that early. So you want to sort of like incubate it, and then you sort of have this consensus with your like close scientific allies, and then you can make it more public.
Oh, thank you.
I had a question I wanted to bump in with, and then I'll go to Josh. Was just like, how heavy is this? I know a lot of people's first reaction to this is, wow, that's a lot of thoughts. So just wondering what it looks like to onboard a lab to it, and how much does it work in their original process?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. So even though there are a lot of elements that we've baked into the like functionality to discourse graphs, we found that by breaking down the research into modular elements makes it easier for new researchers to get onboarded by giving them a pathway. So the part that I skipped over is that you could have like a targeted query from specific experiments that you're thinking about doing. So here's like a list of issues. You say, hey, new researcher, like look through these. We'll have like a little AI summary to give you more context and pick one. And then you can use that to run your experiment and like look through the references at the bottom to pick out what are the like to see what the key questions are, etc. And this has helped onboarding to happen faster for new researchers. And then when you're starting a new graph at the current stage of development, we're sort of doing dedicated onboarding with people who are interested and building, helping to spin up a graph so that they don't have to start from nothing from their existing lab notebook entry, et cetera, so that they start to get value out of the usage of these tools within a day or two. It used to be that it would take a couple of weeks before people started to see the value in their own thinking and structuring. But now, because of this pilot that we're running, that number is now down to a day or two, sometimes hours. And our goal by the end of the pilot, at the end of this coming year, is to make the plugin something that you can just download and it becomes self-evident, in a minute or two, how to use it. But right now, our target audience are sort of deep users, people who are doing multi-year projects who realize that Google Docs aren't cutting it, et cetera.
Thank you.
Josh is next.
Josh.
Yeah, thank you so much. Fascinating. So I think their example there kind of goes towards my question, which is how exactly is LLMs being leveraged within this context? Because it was still kind of squishy for me, and I was hoping you could put a little structure to that. And then a second, just follow-up question is, does this work assume that everybody within the lab is working on the same platform, Obsidian or whatever? And if so, is there like what training issues do you have in terms of getting them acclimated?
Yep, absolutely. So to the first, we've experimented with LLM tools that didn't stick. So for example, I include an AI summary in some of these issue pages for extra context. We've had LLMs try to suggest relationships between these nodes. We're making it easier and easier to have this be an extension of your thinking process. But things like semantic similarity, some like LLM suggestions are a stage that we're going to make it easier to say, well, maybe this pertains to this question over here. Like, do you want to link them? That kind of like suggested connections is something that we build not necessarily into like a chat system, but more into like an extra component that says like, suggested nodes. And everything else like a chat bot that like takes in a query of all these elements we have, but just hasn't stuck for whatever reason. And in terms of how we think the LMs would operate in going forward, we would love to generate this citable, let's go here, citable evidence base in a database that LLMs could pull from when they're making their answers or doing their research or deciding, what in silico experiment that they want to do, so that not only are they pulling from like chunks of text from papers. I hope I didn't freeze. I didn't. Okay. Or but these discrete results. So we'd love to have other databases of early stage research that the LLMs could pull from and contribute to in the future. And in the most immediate use case, we're having researchers, labs who are interested in using Obsidian or like a series of Obsidian vaults or Roam, but we're now building in the capability to push and pull one or more results from one graph to another, and that's what Marc-Antoine on the call is working on.
But they all have to work in Obsidian, all your team members?
In this case, people are taking their day-to-day notes wherever they want, and then when they're sharing for our like meetings or lab meeting, etc., they're posting their like key observations into Roam Research. Over time, they end up using it more and more because it's helpful for their thinking more than what they've been using before. But they still often have like a written notebook for like, how many microliters of X did I add? And a couple of our generally the state of like technology for most of the users we talk to is we don't have anything that works well, so please give us something. But we're now experimenting with people who have their own Obsidian vaults that are like kind of personal, and we like shared like little bits of that to the lab graph is what we're developing right now.
Cool. Glenn. I
Oh, I
cannot
can't
hear
hear
you,
anything.
Glenn. No.
Nope.
Maybe we'll pass to Pat while
I'll
Glenn is
monitor the
figuring out
chat too.
his.
Oh,
And Glenn, if you want to put your question in chat, then we might be able to capture it.
yeah,
But
I
Pat.
guess I was the thing I was thinking about while listening is yeah, there was a collaborator a few years ago named Pooja Oliver was working on something called she was calling plural research and like kind of funding kind of trying to figure out how to fix the funding landscape by like essentially saw this messy situation where the grad students are less deep in the holes and have the wider breadth of vision for where the connections are, but they have the least power to move money and power over the purse strings. So they're kind of imagining just some neat things with like funding and quadratic funding to essentially allow. For them, it was the citation record. It was like you can see breakthrough research when a bunch of like instead of incremental citations, like which is like kind of boring research, it's just yeah, no, important work but different. It was like see that there are signatures of like breakthrough research when a bunch of new citations come together, and then that work as the cycles go on becomes highly cited itself. That means like in the numbers there's like this like reward condition. So they were actually trying to like figure out how to predict or how to reward people who are good predictors of where the breakthroughs will be, as evidenced by the citation record, and kind of like over the rounds of funding cycles, put more money into the hands of people who are good predictors, maybe who aren't even researchers, who just like are really good at seeing like something's going to happen here and it's not there yet. But and I'm just curious whether you see any space or opportunity for that here, like essentially like prediction like I don't know what the thing would be. It's that evidence comes through and someone expects the evidence or has strong intuition and they're kind of willing to put some credibility there even though nothing's the evidence hasn't arrived yet. I don't know, I'm just curious like whether you see any opportunity for like funding mechanisms in these graphs or like or some new element that I don't think there is there yet for like prediction of when future things will arrive in the graph.
Yeah, I mean, for like funding and attribution, the two models that I'm excited about are at this stage, when somebody's saying, okay, I'm going to go into the lab and this requires money, that they could claim it and ask for, say that this is going to cost me $5,000 or something at that time. And for that to be a place where if they've chosen to do that specific experiment, they get some support for that. And then by extension, the person who created the hypothesis might be part of sort of the upstream funding.
Mm-hmm.
And retroactive public goods funding, I think, would work really well for this graph of knowledge as well, where you say, okay, we promise that later on we're going to support the like most foundational evidence for the discoveries that ended up happening by tracing back through the graph. How do you figure out what the most foundational evidence is? I like the idea of doing a counterfactual where you say, how strongly can we tell the story of how CRISPR works without the result from your experiment? If it's
Mm-hmm.
badly, then that means your result was very important. And
Mm-hmm.
I think once we have some sort of impact assessment that works better than journal citation, then this system will become more useful and accurate than journal citation. The prediction, I bet just by looking at the graph structure and connections, you could do that. There's a great talk at IOSP from that Ellie co-organized in March, suggesting that prediction markets in a controlled environment do work quite well for researchers to stake how, to the extent to which they think this evidence is going to be backed up in a controlled environment. I think we'd still need to test it in real life because there in each of these cases, if we design the system so that it's not readily gamed, then we have a chance to keep people's intrinsic motivation to contribute front and center.
So many other
Brilliant.
questions. Like we were past one, so
Yeah, we'll drop a link in chat in the Slack, in the Metagov Slack, and everybody can keep chatting back and forth there. I know this is like always such an exciting topic for me to get other additional iterations of understanding of. I just wanted to send another thank you to Matt for like taking your time to like build all of this. And yeah, we'll see you in the Slack.
Thank you.
later all. Bye.